You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Pick a big moment in the convenience stores industry's history. Whatever it is, coming up with a name, coming up with NACS, coming up with a concept, popularizing eventually self-serve gasoline, northern weather convenience stores, you name it. There's one guy that was at the center of it all, John Roscoe. A lot of these things we take for granted. We're going to dive in a little deeper today and talk to John about some of those innovations that he was around and also where he sees the future going in our industry. So today, joining us, I don't even have a title for him. I'm just calling him Convenience Industry Icon. Our guest today is John Roscoe, who has been at the center of pretty much everything in convenience for well over half a century. So thanks for joining us today, John.
Thank you for having me. It's always good to be able to tell you what I think, and I have an advantage in that I've outlived almost everybody else, so no one can contradict me.
So let's start back with some of these early things. You came up with the name convenience store, and when I heard that, of course, I wanted to check it. So I went back. I went back as early as I could find a Grocery Headquarters magazine, and sure enough, there's a picture of John Roscoe talking about convenience stores. Take us through the idea of you coming up with that name.
The stores were called Bantam stores or drive-in groceries in Dallas and so on. And as you know, they evolved from a dairy store or an ice store. And I went to Dallas in 1956 or 57, met with Cabell's and I think with 7-Eleven. And there were about 500 stores in Dallas at the time. And I made a pitch book. I had just gotten out of the service, and I thought we could do it better in Denver. And I made a pitch book, and I called them convenience stores. In 1961, when 13 of us met in the Muleback Hotel in Kansas City, they wanted to call them either drive-up stores or drive-in stores or Bantam stores. And I thought we were too sophisticated for that, and we'd passed that stage. So I held out for convenience stores, and they finally agreed. But I say there's no one else alive today that was there, to my knowledge, so I can say anything I want.
Well, you also are accurate. Looking back at, we still have the 3 pages, the handwritten minutes from the Muleback Hotel from August 1961, the founding of NACS, where John Roscoe was there and played an influential role. And it lists the attendance, and it's interesting, John. I thought there were all kinds of hidden meanings in there, talking about we shall call ourselves this is what we shall represent, etc. But it was kind of more, here's who was here, let's all go out and get some dinner and drinks, and then let's go meet again, and let's have some more dinner and drinks. So it was almost as much about a social occasion as a monumental founding of a convenience store association.
That's one of the advantages of the association, was that everybody got along and everybody shared ideas with each other. It's also one of the down points of the association is that everyone copies everybody else, and so innovations are hard to come up with because everybody thinks there's a leader and they want to follow him.
So at the time when you were just starting out, 7-Eleven was the big leader, and you have this line that you've repeated to me several times about 7-Eleven and how people might follow the leader. You want to take me through that one again?
You have to remember that the concept, again, was very simple. 7-Eleven had 100 stores in 1951 before they had a cash register. So their demands, their expense demands were not very great. And when I went into the business, we started spending more money, built better stores, and so on. The 7-Eleven was building. And so we had to innovate in order to develop enough margin to pay the expenses we were incurring. Most of the industry kept very simple for quite a while.
The classic quote that I remember from you is you were talking about if 7-Eleven was considered such a leader, that if they nailed a tin can to their roof of all their stores, the next day every convenience store in the country would do the same thing. And that's basically what you're talking about with follow the leader.
It was worse than that. If they mailed one tin can over one store, by the next morning, everyone would do it because everyone thought that 7-Eleven had the answer. I suppose today that most people don't even know why they're called 7-Eleven because they're open 7-Eleven in those days. But as I have told you, I was at a meeting of about 7 or 8 convenience store owners in San Francisco in about 1965. Everybody ordered, Jerry Thompson ordered soup, and then everybody else decided they wanted soup. So it was that bad.
Oh, yes. I guess the message there is if you have soup, you'll eventually have 13,000 stores in the U.S.
Work for them.
So you had mentioned you opened your first stores in Denver, and that itself was a revelation because before you, there were maybe a few stores that were in northern climates, but generally convenience stores were in southern climates. They had the traditional gas station bay doors that you pulled up, and there was no air conditioning or heating or anything like that. You changed that concept with your big top stores in Denver.
That's right. It was a hot weather offer because it started with ice and with dairy products. But sales were greater when the weather was warmer. And unfortunately, that's still part of what the program is today. Yesterday, I visited 2 convenience stores just to see what a present convenience store is today. And it's a snack offer, but it's liquid based. It's based on cold drinks and things that go with cold drinks. But when we went to Denver, I didn't realize that, and so we had to innovate and add additional things in order to survive. So it was mainly our innovations were a matter of survival.
You had some innovations in how you design stores, which, if you see the pictures, a Big Top, they looked like a Big Top circus tent. They were cool looking. You also innovated, and the reason I know all this is you have possibly the most massive collection of convenience store archives of anybody in the world. You've been generous in sharing with NACS some pictures that we've copied, some newspaper articles going back to the 50s, etc. You're the premier archivist for our industry. And looking at some of those pictures that you had sent, you would have all kinds of interesting promotions at your stores to draw people in, whether it's just some stunt to get people to the inside the store or some items that you would sell inside the store that were fairly unique. You want to share any of your favorite stories about that?
As I said, we were desperate. The 7-Eleven stores had garage doors, and they put them up in the morning. In a cold weather climate, we wanted to have an open look without having the advantage or disadvantage of having garage doors. But yes, we did everything. We even had live elephant come to the store, and we'd move them from store to store. At one time, I tried to buy an elephant and so on. You couldn't do anything like that today. We dropped ping pong balls from helicopters with prizes when we had functions in front of the store. So yes, we tried everything. We started with basically limited funds, and we had to make it work.
Who did you look at for ideas around PR? Because you were an early proponent of the value of PR for convenience stores to tell your story.
I was fortunate to run into a public relations man in Denver who had a lot of insight, and so I met with him once a week for a while. We talk about this, and he was very helpful to us. Fortunately or unfortunately, he's dead today.
What were the things that struck you about those conversations and the importance of PR?
Public needed to understand what we were trying to do, and you have to remember think that the convenience store has changed a lot. We were a small grocery store in those days. Today they're a snacks center. I thought yesterday when I went to the two convenience store chains, would anybody stop at this store if they didn't need gasoline? And if I were in the industry today, I'd be asking myself that question every day. Would anybody stop here if they didn't need fuel? Particularly when you're faced with the challenge uh, that automobile fuel may get phased out eventually.
And of course, that's from a combination of both electric vehicles and just better fuel efficiency. You mentioned gas. Let's go back 60 years. In June 1964, we're coming up on the 60th anniversary. You weren't the first to offer gasoline self-serve, but you were the first to offer it in a modern way that didn't initially take off. Not your fault, but ultimately reshaped our industry. You want to talk about how that came about?
We weren't the first to do self-serve. Self-serve, I think, started in Southern California. We were the first to do it on a remote control basis. A fellow in Denver developed a device where you could dispense the gasoline from inside the store and you could have self-service. And that's what changed the business. It was slow to develop. It worked for us. Probably one of the big things, self-service was illegal in most of the United States. And we formed a self-service gasoline association in order to get those laws changed. And we did that in many states.
And of course, later in 1964, you went to the NACS show, which was then called the NACS annual meeting. And there was a presentation that you were a part of, you and a butcher, talking about new profit centers for convenience stores. The concept wasn't as embraced as you thought it would be at that event, was it?
Well, the concept was extremely slow getting embraced altogether. At that event, all the questions were how to be a butcher. But convenience stores were very slow to adopt gasoline, and the oil companies were very slow to adopt convenience stores. So it worked both ways. Uh, but but gasoline didn't become very dominant for 10, 20 years afterwards. We published a annual report called "What Did the Top 25 Oil Companies Say About Gasoline Marketing" for several years, and they didn't say much, but they eventually there were at one time 236,000 gasoline stations. That was in 1964. If I were in the business today, I would worry that my 153,000 convenience stores would go the way of the 236,000 gas stations.
And I want to talk about that a little bit more. But first, leading up to that, you talked about you published something looking at the top oil companies. You published a lot, or self-published a lot, and one of the things you had was essentially a precursor or a somewhat similar companion to what NACS has with the State of the Industry report, and you called it dollar a day, I believe. Talk about that and developing the product and why you did it.
I always wanted to understand the business, and so I thought that I was in search of the most reliable information. So I bought stock in each of the 8 publicly owned chains at that time, and I analyzed their annual report and their 10Ks in what I call the dollars per day survey. It's very simple. Almost all the stores were the same. So if you divided their annual figures by 365, you get their dollars per day margin, you get their dollars per day expense, and you get their dollars per day profit. And if I were in the business today, I'd do that for my chain every day. I do it in the business I am now. But one of the amazing things I looked through. I did that for 18 years until I thought I finally understood the business. In the 18th year, I predicted that 7 of the 8 publicly owned chains would take bankruptcy, which they did in the next 2 years. The problem was their expenses exceeded their margins, but it was obvious that they were going that way. And the industry needs to worry about that today, and it's harder to do because of inflation. It is hard to, like gasoline today, the national average, I think, on your site is $3.12. If you divide that by 10, you get 31 cents a gallon. And that would go back to 1960s. So gasoline is not as exorbitant compared to what it was then as one might think. The difference then, and if you take your 30, 40 cents margin per day that you figure and divide that by 10, you only get about 4 cents. And today you've got credit card fees, and gasoline used to be a cash business. It isn't anymore.
And of course, the credit card fees with that, because about 75% of all transactions at the pump are by plastic. There's still about 25% that are probably unbanked, that are cash customers. So we talked a little bit about if you could do it all over again, or if you were entering the business now, you would do things differently. Do you want to talk about what you would do if you were entering the business now and how that would differ than what you did when you started?
Number one, I wouldn't enter the business today. I don't know what you know better than I what a store costs, but it costs somewhere between $2 and $5 million. I think the average you showed was $2.5 million. Again, you have to divide that maybe by 10 to compare. But stores used to cost about $60,000, of which $10,000 was gasoline. Gasoline costs a lot more. I got out of the convenience store business basically in about 1974, and I converted our stores to food and deli, and then eventually I called them cheaper, and then I called them super cheaper. If I were going to do it today, I would combine an Aldi store with gasoline and sell basic items. The offer of convenience stores is not very good. Even then, in the 80s, they were closing about 5% of their stores every year. And you had a thing last week on In-N-Out. In-N-Out has been in business 75 years, which is a hamburger chain in seven states. And they haven't, until last week, they hadn't closed a store in 75 years because their concept is strong. And they're not only their merchandise offer, but their people offer is extremely strong. So the 2 stores I was in yesterday were not in the grocery business at all. I'd figure out what do people eat, how do they eat. I'd go in not the snack business, I'd go in the meal business.
And to a certain extent, that is where a lot of the more progressive convenience stores are going, where now you're looking at about 36% of in-store profits are related to food service, prepared food, prepared drinks. So you definitely see that. And we have an Aldi near us. It is pretty busy pretty much all the time with people going in, and not necessarily, some are filling up an entire grocery basket. Some are just doing 2 or 3 bags, but they get people in and out, and they feel an awful lot like a convenience store. So you think tying that to gas has a lot of traction?
I'd hired a cost accountant, and I would figure out if the food business in my convenience gasoline store was cost effective. One of the stores I was in yesterday had 5 people in the store, 5 people running the store to make the snacks. There's no way that they can afford that kind of labor cost. You got to make it simple. You're in a simple business. You got to keep it simple. Again, I wouldn't be in the snack business. I'd be in the basic meal business. I'd go to Price Club. I'd see what they're doing on meals, and I'd figure out a 10-day menu thing and have a basic meal for every day. Sprouts is really in the meal business also. And as you probably know, that Henry Boney, one of the other founders of the Convenience Store Association, really the founder, uh, was the basis of today's Sprouts store.
That I did not know. He was NAC's chairman for the first 2 years, and then I believe he sold his stores to 7-Eleven.
1964, he sold the stores to 7-Eleven. He was the reason he founded the association was he was in some financial trouble, and he wanted to get to know the 7-Eleven people. He did that. In January of '63, I believe it, or '64. I went to San Diego. I had lunch with Henry. Henry says, "I have 130 stores. I'm selling them to 7-Eleven. If I were you, I'd come to California and open stores." I had promised my wife a vacation in Palm Springs, and we forgot the Palm Springs thing. He said I'd go to Northern California. We went to Northern California, and that's how we got there. We couldn't put gasoline in the first 13 stores because it was illegal, but we finally got it approved in our 14th store, and then added to all the rest of the stores.
So again, we're coming up in June this year, 60th anniversary of essentially modern fueling, and we'll see how we can plan, and using some of the PR that you've taught me over the years, see how we can get out the word on that and tell a story about something that pretty much 30 to 40 million people do every day. I also said earlier that you're still working. You want to talk a little bit about what you're doing now?
I'm in the make your own cigarette business. We sell natural tobacco, bulk tobacco, and we sell make your own machines. And we're about to go back into the cigarette business. We've had private label cigarettes for 40 years, I guess, since the early 1980s. As you know, cigarettes are still one of the backbones of the convenience business, and we think make your own is the answer. You can smoke for 10%. We have a company called Powermatic Wholesale. Anybody wants to call me, they can look online.
Before we end, there's two other things I definitely want to talk to you about. One is, I mentioned you're still active in business. Number two, you're still active. And when I mean active, I'll get emails from you. I just biked so many miles today and walked another so many. Tell us about you keeping track of how many miles you have logged and where you intend to get to.
In about 1963, 64, I read Ken Cooper's book on aerobics, and he advocated running as the answer. And so I started running in January 1st, 1965, and I've kept track of my day timer ever since that time of how many miles I've moved. I did it just for running for the first 30 years, and it was 31,000. Then I started keeping track of the walking miles and the biking miles. So for the last 58 years, I've moved 4.2 miles every day, not including skiing and swimming, which I have done a lot of. I have 5 miles a day average now since last June 1st. I'll hit 100,000 miles in 6.79 years from now.
So just a little before your 100th birthday.
No, it's nearly 102, unfortunately.
Okay, well, you have to speed that up again. But just kidding. That's an amazing amount of movement and activity for somebody of any age. So I imagine that's also something that's really important to you, and just keeping active in the business community and everything else you do.
I've always been compulsive.
So that's a perfect segue to my last question. You are the premier archivist of our industry, and we'll have email conversations, and you'll have something from your day timer or something from a newspaper article or something from scrapbooks. Where do you keep all this stuff?
I have a lot of files and so on. Unfortunately, when we moved from California to here, I deleted some of them. But I can pretty well access the basis of whatever I'm saying. And it is amazing when I go back to my daytimer of 50, 60, 70 years ago, how it straightens me out on the truth.
Well, I've shared some of the files that you've shared with me with some other retailers, and a couple of them have said, okay, we're getting on a plane. We're going to visit John. We got to talk to him more. We got to see all this stuff. So you may get a couple requests from folks after this podcast airs to do just that, because John, it's a remarkable story about what you've meant to the industry, how you've led it forward, and how you continually look at it and say, maybe we can do better. So just continually challenging the status quo, because how people define convenience is always changing. And if you're not changing, somebody else will figure it out first. Any final thoughts?
I know that you say that people may contact me. I know that no one likes a critic. I was the program chairman in about 1974 for the NACS annual convention. And I had Bob Kahn, a retailing expert, come and give his opinion, and everybody hated him. He was a Walmart director, and I think the lesson here is Sam liked dissidents, and he liked to hear the other side of the story. And I think that's what all convenience stores operators need to do, is instead of completely following the leader, the Wawa, Sheetz, Quick Trip leader today, they need to say, if I didn't have gasoline, would my store exist? And my answer is it wouldn't exist with the present format. But again, no one likes a critic. I think the stores that I was in yesterday were better run than the stores of yesteryear, but the offer is poorer.
Well, thank you, John, for always sharing with us. You have an open invitation to write for NACS Magazine, to be on a podcast, to do whatever you would like to do, to talk a little bit more about what you've done over the 6-7 decades of working in the convenience business. So it was a pleasure, John, and I hope we run into each other again soon, and I know we will stay in touch. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you all for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.